Welcome to the Sustainable Dish Podcast. I'm Diana Rogers, a real food registered dietitian, author, and sustainability advocate. I co-host this podcast with James Connolly, who was a producer on my film, Sacred Cow. I also founded the Global Food Justice Alliance, an initiative advocating for the inclusion of animal-sourced foods like meat, dairy, and eggs for a more nutritious, sustainable, and equitable worldwide food system. You can check it out and join me at globalfoodjustice.org. Thanks again for listening, and now on to our show. Welcome back to the Sustainable Dish Podcast. I have with me our podcast editor who, her name's Emily Soape, and she just became a registered dietitian. So she has been podcast editing for me for quite some time. Emily, how long have you been the editor? Over a year for sure.
It's almost been 2 years. So I think in August, it'll be 2 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Rock star job on that, just super dependable and awesome. And you're so familiar with the podcast. And so, I get a lot of questions from people who are thinking about becoming a nutritionist. They don't know whether to become sort of like some kind of certified nutritionist or RD. So I thought it would be kind of fun to just talk about your experience becoming an RD, why you went through the program, what your day-to-day life is like now, trials and tribulation, all of that. So,
Okay.
And we should mention, so it's 9:00 your time. It is 3:00 my time. You live on Hawaii.
Yes, I do.
Or in Hawaii. What is it? In Hawaii or on?
I think when you're referring to a specific island, they'll say on. So like on Oahu. So I live in on Oahu in Hawaii. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's start at the beginning. You did not grow up in Hawaii, I'm guessing? Or
No,
did you?
I didn't. I've moved around quite a bit. I grew up in Texas, so you might hear a little bit of Southern twang on some certain words. But I've moved around kind of a lot. I'm married to someone in the military, so that provides me with opportunities to live in cool places like Hawaii. Otherwise, there's no way I could possibly afford living here. It's crazy expensive. So
Yeah. I was watching one of those like house hunter shows, and their budget was like over $1 million, and what they could get was really tiny.
It's crazy. Like you'll drive around and on the mainland, it's like you can tell when you're in a nice neighborhood. You can tell when the houses are fancy. But here, you could just be driving down a regular street, regular neighborhood. And if it's close enough to the ocean, it could be almost $1 million. It's crazy how anybody affords to live here. Which, I mean, you hear about that stuff all the time. The locals have nowhere to go. There's a real divide between locals and people that with money that move in. So yeah.
So what ends up happening to folks who are local, who are working in the service industry? What do they do for housing?
Yeah, so roommates, multi-generational housing, and living arrangements are very common here. I think some of it is by choice, but a lot of it is their only option. So yeah, that's what you see a lot is situations like that. A lot of people that I work with, they still live with their entire family, even though they're adult professionals, going about their lives. But yeah, they still live with brothers, sisters, moms, dads, aunties, uncles. Yeah. So it's really interesting. I think there's some good and bad things with that. So
yeah, well, I know that's a little more common in Europe too. For some reason, it's always funny when I've explained to my European friends, like it seems like in America, if you haven't moved away from your hometown, you like kind of haven't made it. Like there's sort of this stigma for people who live even in the same town that they grew up in, let alone with their parents. So it doesn't need to be like that.
No, it definitely doesn't. I think there's a lot of benefit to living in a multi-generational household. You have people to share the workload. You have all this additional wisdom living with you. When you get older, you have someone there to care for you. And I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this later with me working in a hospital, but you see what happens with these older people that don't have anywhere to go. And it's really sad. Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so let's back up to
Yeah.
your journey. When how did you become interested in nutrition, and was this your major undergrad? Like, let's talk about how you became a dietitian.
Yeah. So I knew this was going to be a question. So I feel like everybody has their origin story. So
Yeah.
I've been trying to think of what mine is, and I kind of identified 2 points.
Mhm.
So nutrition wasn't my undergrad. I did finance, like a bachelor's in business, which if I would have been paying attention to what I liked and what I enjoyed, that would not have been the career path. But you're young. Some people don't know. I was one of the people that didn't know. And I didn't realize until I got out and was doing the whole adult job thing that, oh, I am not interested in this at all. And what I realized is, oh, what I read in my free time is diet books. And to be quite honest, it's because I wanted to be thin. It's because I didn't want to gain weight. I had the standard 80s, 90s child upbringing with a mom that counted the starch exchanges, and even my dad had some influence on that too, negative influence to be clear. He was
Mhm.
doing intermittent fasting before it was cool, and so I was getting all this like mixed messages, disordered eating, all that type of stuff. So I was like, I've got to figure out for myself, what to do. And right around that time, so it would have been like 2008, 2010, there was that big market downturn. I was working in property management in Houston, so it hit a little bit later. The company downsized, and I started working at a gym. So then I got really interested into all that stuff, decided to formalize it, go back to school. You start Googling things, registered dietitian comes up. That's what I want to be, registered dietitian. So fast forward a few years, I had really significant back pain that I just could not get rid of. I went to all sorts of doctors, the chiropractors, acupuncturists, all these different types of things. Finally, I met a chiropractor who not only fixed my back pain, which is a huge deal, but then he was like, okay, let's talk about moving forward, how to stop this. So he introduced me to an anti-inflammatory diet, and he let me borrow, it was one of Lauren Cordain's books. So that's when, and I'm in school for like your standard nutrition stuff, and he gives me this book, and I'm like, oh, I don't know about this. And it
Uh-huh.
took a lot. I mean, and then once you start researching that, you find Chris Kresser, you find Rob Wolf, you find Diana Rogers. And to be quite honest, and I'm not trying to like super flatter you, but it wasn't until I read your stuff that I was, and maybe it's because hearing it from a woman, hearing it from a registered dietitian, I was able to take that information to heart. And it really made me feel better about eating meat. Because at this point, I was a vegetarian.
Mm.
I wasn't very good at it. I mean, if you can be like good at it, but there was like tons of soy in my diet. My skin was garbage. And so I slowly started to change it. At this time, I was living with my sister. She was making these changes with me. So we were doing it together. And slowly but surely, like back pain went away, didn't come back, skin cleared up, the same things that we've heard 1,000 times. And this really made me rethink the dietitian thing, because I was like, okay, they are nothing, none of this is being talked about. It's primarily talking about disease states, how to manage diabetes with medicine, how to manage like kidney failure and things like that. So I really had an identity crisis, like maybe this isn't what I want to do. And there are other things out there like the nutrition therapy association. I know that you
Mhm.
did that. And so I looked into all those things, but for just to fast forward through this long origin
No, no,
story.
no, it's really interesting to me because you not only had, I found that most of my, classmates were in it because they were interested in being thin or had disordered eating that they were trying to recover from. And there's just a handful of people that came to it from a place of sickness, and those were the folks that were secretly like, what are they talking about? That's so low fat, or that's, I can't believe that's so low meat. So those were the friends that I ended up making, were mostly the ones that came to this from sickness. And that's, as you know, that's Chris Kresser's story. That's Rob Wolf's
Mhm.
story. So I think it's interesting that you first came to nutrition, to dietetics from, path number one, but then
Yeah.
the introduction of story number two is what changed like the nutrition narrative that was going on. So I think this is really fascinating. And how old were you? Because you're super young right now. So how old were you when like this was all kind of percolating in you?
Right, right. So that would have been, and thank you for thinking that I'm super young. We can get to my age in a second, but because this is definitely second career for me.
Yeah.
So I would have been late 20s, early 30s when I
Okay.
started looking into all this stuff. And so once I decided like dietetics wasn't maybe not the path for me,
Hmm.
um I got into public health at the same time I got married and then started moving around even more with my husband. So then finding a job was a big challenge. So that's when I went back to, you know what, if I had these letters after my name, it would make job hunting and all of that a little bit easier. And still in the back of my mind, I was hoping that some vault of secret nutrition information would open up, once I got the letters, once I finished the internship. Side note, it does not. So I feel like everything that I've really learned, especially from the preventative side of nutrition, that is all stuff that you do on your own.
Totally.
So,
I felt that there would be this golden key. I kept like
yeah.
thinking that like, is if I just study this enough, then I will know it, and then I will have this golden key, and it will open all the doors, these like magical gates to nutrition nirvana, and I will understand it. And I'm
Yes.
still learning today. I'm still evolving my nutritional philosophy. Uh, it's still rooted in the same kinds of things, but there's a lot more kind of nuance and tweaking and stuff that makes a difference. Anyway, but
Yeah.
enough about me. So
Well, no, it's
keep
funny that you say that because from listening from your podcast, literally from episode 2, maybe, that I've heard this evolution that you've gone through with the increased nuance and just more just understanding and accepting of people in general.
right.
So yeah.
Yeah, one big thing I've really come to terms with is on, and this is going to be super controversial,
Mhm.
and I'm making this about me again, which I didn't mean to do, but you know I just going to throw this out there because I really feel like I need to say it. Drugs like Ozempic, as anti that as I would have been 10 years ago,
Mm.
after counseling so many people and seeing so many people struggle with diet and lifestyle changes, my heart breaks for so many people who either have failed at that, or their lives just don't allow for either the knowledge or the privilege, or they're just trying to make it day to day, and they just don't, they've been fed this toxic environment of food. It's not their fault. And if they can take a pill that might ward off the horrible impacts that diabetes can on people, the blindness, the amputations, the dialysis. I mean, having worked in a hospital and having gone through the RD program, I have much more, I guess, sympathy for meeting people where they are and understanding that life is hard, and like we only get one shot, and like if this can help some people that, I just think I used to see, it's lifestyle only, nutrition only. And now I'm like, life is hard and for a lot of people. And I want to see people live to see their grandchildren.
Yeah.
And if that can help, nutrition lifestyle is always going to be number one, but there are just so many reasons why that doesn't work for some people. And that's okay.
Yeah, no, same. I couldn't agree more because I had very like concrete ideas about the way I was going to approach my career before I started, and the way I was going to talk to people and counsel people and things like that. But once you get in it and once you are face to face with people, you realize how small the change needs to be, and you realize the different things that people are struggling with. And because I my concentration was actually in diabetes, so I got to work in an outpatient clinic that was their primary focus. They did a few other things, but just the short interactions that you have with people every 4 to 6 weeks, and you hear what they're dealing with. And one thing that I've noticed is that it is very rarely only about the food. Like during these counseling appointments, you are not spending the majority of your time teaching people what they need to do, because it's likely that they already know, or they already know some of the basic first steps. It's all the other stuff that they are dealing with. And so whether it's the relationship that they're in with their spouse, whether it's, it's a lot of times it's women and they're already putting all this other pressure on themselves, and they're trying to do it all and they don't want to ask for help. And I mean, that's just one of the myriad of issues that even in the short amount of time that I've been doing this, that you see. So, so yeah, I totally understand that. And going back to the medications, I asked my preceptor at the diabetes clinic, I was like, is the goal ever to get people off medications? And she said that by the time they've made it to the point where they're in this outpatient setting with her, a lot of times it is too late. Their pancreases have been damaged to the point that no amount of low carb eating, no amount of lifestyle changes is going to get it back to the point that they can be completely free of medicine. Like maybe you can lower it, maybe you can, make some changes to something that's not as strong, but yeah, so I completely agree with what you're saying. Like just the real life experience just changes how you think about things.
Yeah, I mean, during my one of my clinical rotations, I was at Mass General Hospital working with the pediatric bariatric department. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh.
Yeah.
So these are kids that are facing bariatric surgery, and we were nutrition counseling these kids, right? And they would come in with their families, with like a caregiver, and it was just so not about food. I mean, they're like these kids were like latchkey kids. There was, limited food education in the house,
Mhm.
and video games was the only thing, or I guess today it would be TikTok, right? So,
Right.
um, not eating, food that their family knows to buy it's a big change. And these, for a child to be that obese is something that is really difficult to reverse.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, the longer, I mean, there's studies that show the longer that you've been overweight, the less likely you are to lose it. And I like with the health at any size movement, intuitive eating and stuff like that. I've really tried to take some time to think, like, okay, how do I feel about that? You know, because that is such a big thing right now, and I've found that a lot of my focus and a lot of my thoughts are that maybe weight loss shouldn't be the center of what we're talking about, because so many kids are growing up overweight. Like they might not get to what is considered a healthy BMI, which we all know that's flawed. That is super
Mhm.
flawed, and I don't like that as a metric. So I feel like in a lot of these appointments with people, I don't try to center the conversation around weight loss. It's, let's look at other metrics. Let's look at gaining strength. I think that's a huge thing, especially when you're talking about in a hospital setting, the sarcopenia, the frail little old ladies that come in, and like the loss of independence that means. So it's like
Oh, totally.
let's focus on those metrics when it
Mhm.
comes to talking about being healthy, and defining what healthy means for you, because that's different for everybody too.
Totally. Uh, okay, backing up a little
Yeah.
bit from that conversation, let's talk about the actual. So, did you go and get a master's degree, or did you do a coordinated program? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so I ended up getting a master's degree in public health. This was kind of during my identity crisis where I was like, oh, I don't know if dietetics is for me.
Hmm.
I did get a master's in public health, which I thought was very beneficial, because I like the idea of systemic change and maybe making a bigger impact like that. But what I realized is just getting a master's degree in public health alone it almost isn't enough. Like, you need to then go on to study epidemiology, you need to then become a dietitian. It's like a master's degree in public health is almost what people just tack on as an extra. It's usually
Hmm.
for, just from what I've seen, my experience only,
Yeah.
it's it's extra, and it wasn't helping with my goal, which was to make my job search easier as I moved around. So the timing finally worked out right. Once we moved to Hawaii, I started working as a diet aide for Sodexo at a local hospital. And I started checking into their internship program. And I had just enough time to apply. And then if you work for Sodexo, you can be pre selected for their internship program. I think it just makes it easier for them, because if you're already working there, they can just dump you right in as an intern in the
Yeah.
hospital. So
Hmm.
it works best for them.
Place you,
Oh,
not
right.
dump you.
That's right. Place you. Yeah. But so I was like, okay, this is perfect. I've got plenty of time to apply, get accepted, start the internship, because that was a big problem before. Like, the timing just never worked out for me to apply and then be in a place long enough, with my
Do you know
husband
how
moving
long
around.
you're gonna
Mhm.
be in one location, or at least, the minimum amount of time you're gonna be somewhere?
Usually it's about 3 years, and
Okay.
all the different branches are different. My husband's in the Navy, so
Okay.
for them it's about 3 years. So when you're moving to a new place and you don't know anybody, and I feel like having a network of dietitians that you already know makes this whole process way easier. Um, so it's like every time I move somewhere new, it's like, oh, I don't know anybody, so I felt like I would have to start over anytime I would even think about going into dietetics. This time it worked out though. And I was able to do my internship at the hospital was where I was working, which makes it very nice. I would say for anybody that is looking into dietetics, if you can, get a job as a diet aide first, because it will make the clinical part of your rotations, which is the biggest part, it will make it less overwhelming. Because I think if I hadn't have done that first, I would have been so lost and so stressed out. So anybody that's looking
Mhm.
into that, that would definitely be the course of action that I would take.
And, what do you need to become a diet aide, and what does that mean?
So a diet aid, they look for people with nutrition degrees or somebody that's in school for nutrition. I think that's
Okay.
primarily what you look for. Some of them you do have to be a dietetic technician registered, which you can just get that after you. I think for some it's even maybe an associate's degree, but like a 4-year degree in nutrition. You take a test after. you have that qualification. Not all of them look for that. The hospital that I'm in, you don't have to do that, but it's so the diet aid position is the person that will go through and check all the meal trays, make sure they're compliant with the patient's diet, and make sure they're compliant with the patient preferences. That
Okay.
is primarily what the job is. After that, I like to describe it as you're almost like a server for the hospital. Somebody calls down needing some sort of food thing, you bring it up to them. So if you've been a server before, if you've waited tables, you're going to be a good diet aid.
Yeah.
Um, so that's primarily what that job is, but it gives you exposure to all these different diets, how the dietitians work, and if you're on the fence about whether you want to be a dietitian, that would be good exposure to it as well.
Hmm.
um
Yeah. Did you know that by the time you're thirsty, you're likely dehydrated? In fact, about 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. And even mild dehydration has shown to impact concentration and memory in adults and in kids. Simply drinking plain water is not enough. You need to be adding electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and magnesium, which help your body absorb water and function at its best. My favorite brand is Element, started by my co author and good friend, Rob Wolf. I really love the citrus flavor, but you can get a free sample pack of flavors with any purchase when you go to sustainabledish.com/element. Element has no sugar or dodgy ingredients and makes regular water taste amazing. It's the perfect way to keep you hydrated and on your game, both physically and mentally. I drink it every day. So check out sustainabledish.com/element for your free sample pack of flavors today. Okay, so let's talk about some of the classes that you took,
yeah.
that were some of the dietetics classes, because a lot of people are kind of confused about the whole process, right? So let's kind of walk them through, like, as if whoever's listening is like, I've always wanted to know how to become a dietitian.
Yeah, yeah. So for my undergrad, I mean, it was a long time ago, but there are a lot of science classes, which I was surprised about because I came from, business background, minimal amount of science, and then I had to go back and take like all these chemistries and anatomy and physiology, and initially I was very shocked by that. Of course, looking back on it, I'm like, well, of course you had to take this, you idiot. So
Mhm.
if if you don't think you're scientifically minded, I think that's okay, because I don't really think I was either. There's all sorts of like tutors and help you can get, like, believe me, if I made it through it, you can make it through it too. And so from there, once you get that science background, then you start moving into, your general nutrition classes and things like that. There's that one big textbook that everybody gets for like medical nutritional therapy that has all the different disease states and idea ideal ways to treat those with food and nutrition. And that primarily is what I remember the bulk of my education being. I think what is missing, at least in the curriculum that I did, is you need to learn how to communicate with people. You need to understand more about like psychology and how the mind works. And it's like there needs to be more practice for motivational interviewing, for, getting people to change behavior. It needs to almost like less focus on the teaching part of it and more focused on like the human behavior side of it.
100% agree with you. And actually, Nutritional Therapy Association, that was a very large focus of their program.
Hmm.
And we had a lot of practice where we had to take on clients. We practiced on classmates. We had the book Motivational Interviewing for Healthcare, which I think was a book that I also had to read when I was going through the dietetics program. But I felt that it was way too overall. It was way too clinical of a program and not enough human sociology, psychology, therapy. I mean, really,
Hmm.
you're a therapist. And also, what I've found in practice is that people who are ready to make a nutrition change, that's like the first step in really a bigger life change. Like that they come to you maybe before they even talk to a therapist, or maybe they have no control in the rest of their life and they're like, I gotta see a dietitian. And you end up, I mean, what you said before with people's relationships holding them back, I talked to a lot of women who were in, just sort of ended up coming up. Um, uh, Relationship stress, to put it in the most mild term possible, and they were trying to solve that with diet.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so much. I think the dietetics programs could really benefit from, um, real world too. I mean, we could have been practicing with maybe a supervisor before the internship. Like while we were students, we could have been helping so many people with nutrition guidance
Hmm.
through the school.
Yeah.
Like, why don't they do that?
Yeah, I know that. I think that's a big piece that's missing. Because I talking to my preceptors at the hospital, they they were commenting on how other interns in the past were very reticent to go in and talk to patients. Like that was one thing that they really struggled with, because at this point they hadn't had any of that. So, and most of them are in their 20s, they're still figuring out how to adult, and like talking to patients should be one of the primary things that you're doing, but it's one of the things that people struggle with the most. And the only way you're going to get better at that is with exposure, is with doing it,
Hmm.
is like being in the room with somebody, like not knowing what they're going to say and figuring out how you're going to respond to that, and you're only going to get better with practice. So it would
Yeah.
just make sense to have that just all throughout the curriculum, just get somebody used to talking to people.
Yeah, when I first I remember for maybe the first 6 months or so, when I started working one on one with people, I would get like, I would have like a mini panic attack before they walked in the room. And I'd spend like an hour going through their intake paperwork, and my like hands would get sweaty, and I'd like have a minor freak out and have to like do some deep breathing before they walked in the room. Like, I'm sure they had no idea that I was like going through all of that. But,
Right.
and I was already, I had, I had run our farm stand before that. And I was really used to, like holding the baby while I'm working a cash register, while I'm, doing all these other things, running big events. But one on one nutrition counseling in a small office where everything's kind of quiet and it's all like you're the professional,
It's a lot of
it was
pressure.
quite an intimidating experience for me.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that is very common. I don't see why it wouldn't be, you know? Like I feel like that's just a very normal human response to feel all this pressure, like, oh, I need to get it all right. I need to say all the right things. And so I feel like it's really easy, especially students and interns, to not feel confident in what they know, you know?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but that, I feel like that is solved with practice. Like make yourself do it before you're ready. So anybody that's like about to start an internship, like make yourself go do it. You're in a very unique position where people do not expect you to be perfect, to get everything right. Like this is the time, for lack of a better word, for failure, for learning. Like, and I almost wish I would have taken advantage of it more, to like go even further outside of my comfort zone. but but yeah, that is my advice to anybody that's in an internship right now or that's about to be, like, go out there, go make your mistakes, go try different things, and like
Hmm.
talk to as many people as you can. Like once your preceptor is fine with it, talk to
Hmm.
all the people, definitely.
Yeah, and also there's a big difference between one-on-one in an office setting, like an outpatient community setting, and then walking into someone's hospital room where they're
Mhm.
not at their best. They, recovering from a surgery, or they're in there because of an accident or some other reason. It can be, they're not feeling great, obviously,
Yeah.
and you're walking into them, they're in their pajamas, and there's cords and beeping noises everywhere, and
Yeah.
so that environment is also, something that I really struggled with being in that environment.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And even now, I guess I've been in my job for about a month now. Like
Mhm.
once I get up on the hospital floor and I'm going in to see my first patient, I'm like, okay, okay, working myself up. But then like once you get in there, they're just people. They're, maybe they don't want to see you, maybe they don't have any desire to see you, and that's fine. You don't have to harangue them. But I just go in and I'm like, hey, my name is Emily, I'm a dietitian, I'm here to talk to you about your food. So try not to work it up into like this big serious situation. You're just going in to chat with people. So
Right.
so yeah.
So what were some of your favorite classes, and what were some of the classes that maybe you didn't like, or you feel like maybe were outdated?
Yeah. Like I said, it's been so long ago. I don't know if I'm remembering like specific classes that I enjoyed or didn't enjoy.
Or things you learned?
But okay. Um, One of the things that I was surprised that I didn't like, at least with my in my internship experience, I was like, oh, I'm gonna do all these meetings over Zoom or virtually because that's what they were still doing a lot of those at the outpatient center. But the range of complications that came with that, because people didn't just click the link and hop on. It was this, oh, can you hear me? No, I can't. Oh, the internet's bad here. So these 30-minute consultations turn into like 20. And what are you really able to accomplish in 20 minutes? So that kind of changed my thoughts on where I wanted my career to go, because I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to get a remote job. I'm going to work from home. I'm going to, I won't have to worry about finding another job again because this job will be able to go with me wherever I go. But that was a real grind to do that. Um
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you, and it's
yeah.
also there's something. I mean, it's nice to get up and move, in between your nutrition, encounters, and
Hmm.
it's also there's something, where we lose something in translation when you're physically not there, especially with something that can seem as sterile as a nutrition dietitian meeting.
Right, right. And then one thing that I realized that I liked more, like way more than I thought I would,
Yeah.
is figuring out tube feeding for people and like
Ah,
parental nutrition and stuff like that, and learning about
yeah.
that. And maybe because there's something very satisfying about, let me do this equation and figure out all this math and get X as the answer, and that will help you. And so there's just something really satisfying about that. Um,
Right. Yeah, let's talk briefly about that, because that's
okay.
another, I mean, it's not as controversial as Ozempic, I'm sure, but you know, obviously food is best.
Mhm.
But there are situations in hospitals where people need to be fed, through a tube or through an IV. So we've
Yeah.
got, feeding tubes, which is the enteral nutrition. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Enteral nutrition is
Enteral.
your tube feeding.
Right. And then there's, parenteral.
Parenteral, yeah, through an
Yeah.
IV.
Through an IV,
So you're
which
not
is
using your digestive system in that situation.
right, which
Right.
is not preferred because
Right.
a lot of bacteria can, develop around where that port is.
Mhm.
But in some cases, I believe there was like heart transplant cases, or
Mhm.
really severe cancer cases where, they couldn't have anything that was, um, entering the body that was foreign, because they were like trying to deal with like a transplant or something like that. Is that
Right,
right?
right. Yeah, usually that's the case. It's usually after like surgical procedures, like
Hmm.
really aggressive like GI surgeries and things like that.
Hmm.
But other
Hmm.
than that, they prefer tube feeding, and so it's
Yes.
been very interesting to see because there's all these different kinds of formulas and situations where you would use one over another. So it's been really interesting reading about that and reading about different research around it. One of the papers that I read that was I thought was very interesting, because in the United States for a very long time they would use soybean oil as the primary fat,
Yes.
and they realized that, oh, it's creating all this inflammation in these people, and maybe we shouldn't do this. So they started using like blends of oil that have there's still some soy, but there's also like olive oil, and you get, omega 3s and all these other different types of blends in the tube feeding, and they realized that patients did better. What I do find interesting is that they then have not translated that to regular populations, like, oh, maybe if all these people are having all this soy oil, like maybe it's causing inflammation in regular people too. Yeah, that message hasn't quite gotten out, but it's really interesting to see that. And it's interesting to see people getting better, and then being able to go to regular foods and things like that. So that's one way to like be rewarded for your work.
Well, it's probably easier to study feeding tube people because there you don't have to like create a trial. Like there they are already
Right.
locked up in a hospital room.
Right. It's
So you
controlled
can
for
just
you.
monitor, right, where diet is just so tricky because people have their preferences and they're going to choose whatever they choose off the menu that day.
Hmm.
Let's talk about food trays at hospitals,
Okay.
um, and what they look like and what you wish they could look like.
Okay. So I will say, as far as hospital food goes, here it's not too bad. The patients have very culturally appropriate choices, because in
Hmm.
Hawaii, oh, there's a big Asian influence here. So, lots of rice, of course, but lots of vegetarian centric options, because here, like, people eat tofu not because they're vegetarian, but because they eat tofu because it's a part of their culture.
Hmm.
So the like the trays in and of themselves just have lots of choices for people that's appropriate for the people that are living here. um Here recently they've made some adjustments for portion sizes. Rice is served with everything, and it would be, 2 scoops of rice, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But recently they've cut that in half, so I think that's a positive change. The hospital that I'm working at is part of the Adventist health system, so
Okay.
as we know, they're very vegetarian, but they do
Yep.
not do that for the patients.
Okay.
It's some sort of animal-based protein at every meal. They do have vegetarian options, though, maybe a few more options than another hospital might have.
Okay.
Um, but a lot of the food, I would say 75% of the food is cooked from scratch. So they're actually, thawing out meat, because a lot of things come from the mainland, a lot of things are frozen. That's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
Um, but, a
Yeah, but
lot
cooking
of,
from scratch is awesome. Are
yeah,
you're still it's still under Sodexo
it
or
is. Yeah, it is still
okay.
under Sodexo. At least for now. I mean, I feel like
Yeah.
they've thought about like changing it around, but yeah, it's they still, I kind of forget where I was going with that. But yeah, a lot of things are cooked from scratch.
Mhm.
Lots of really good fruit options because of where we are. In Hawaii, they have a banana called an apple banana. It's those little ones. Like, they don't serve the big, like, foot long bananas that you see on the mainland. It's these tiny
Yeah.
little bananas that aren't as sweet. So I feel like that's a really good thing. There are still some pretty processed options, and a lot of that just comes down to, we don't have the staff, we don't have highly skilled staff to make everything from scratch. So, just like in schools, you kind of have to have considerations for that when
Mhm.
you go to plan a menu. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, I feel like overall, I'm okay with a lot of the food that is served there. Like I do eat some of the food there. So
Yeah.
so yeah.
Is it in the cafeteria there for families and staff? Is it similar food to what's
It
going up in the
is
trays?
it is similar. Usually it has, like more sodium or, things like that. But
Yeah.
they always have like one animal-based protein dish and they always have a vegetarian option. And this was actually a recent change. They used to have nothing but vegetarian food, but now they have both options.
Mm,
So yeah, and it's busier now that there are more options. I'm not saying it's because of the meat, but it very well could be.
right.
So
So how many other dietitians are working at your hospital?
there are 3 full-time dietitians, and then we have a couple that work as needed if we're short-staffed. So,
Okay.
but there's only like 2 on at a time because it's a 160 bed hospital, which is relatively small.
Mm.
But but yeah.
Um, I think we could mention, and we don't have to go into specifics,
Mm.
obviously, but one thing that I felt very frustrated with was the inequality with pay for dietitians in hospitals relative to other people with similar education levels.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah, we're definitely not making what like a nurse would make or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Even though it's as rigorous a program as nursing, if not more, school.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I feel like by the time I got finished with the internship and studying for the test, I felt like I had as much or almost as much medical knowledge as a nurse would have.
Right.
I mean,
Um,
obviously a little bit different. Like I'm not in any
It's
way
different, right?
diminishing.
Right. It's different in that we take all the sort of the prereqs and the core science classes that nurses
Mhm.
take, and then we just, but our internship is pretty grueling. And one of the reasons dietitians are paid less is because Medicare doesn't reimburse for
Right.
nutrition services unless it is what renal
It's yeah,
disease
diabetes
or
and end-stage renal.
renal.
Yeah.
And so because they can't bill Medicare for us, then that means they don't bill any insurances
Mhm.
for nutrition, and therefore we're paid at a much lower rate than nurses, like
Yeah.
much lower, significantly lower.
Yeah.
I didn't really know that when I was going through the education. And private practice is different
Mhm.
because you have a lot more flexibility. You can actually get reimbursed pretty well
Mm.
for consults, one-on-one consults.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of work to that. You have to, manage all your billing, and uh, that can be hard to. You might not get paid for 6 or 9 or 12 months
Yeah.
for some of your services.
That's what I've heard. Like getting like working with insurance is very frustrating. But yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard that they're being reimbursed for more things like health coaching. It with some insurances is being covered, which I think
mm,
is that's a great idea because it tends to the more preventative side of nutrition,
hmm
which I think
yeah.
is the lever that's going to move things. But
One tricky thing with that is it's very difficult to investigate whether or not your services will be covered by a given nutrition plan or a health plan. And so if you're not covered and you find out 6 months later that you're not covered, going back and telling them, oh, those 3 appointments that we had, your
yeah,
insurance actually didn't cover it. I would say about 50% of the time do not get paid at all.
yeah,
Um, I mean, unless I don't know, some other dietitians have like stealthy collection
I like
services or
wasted.
something like
Yeah,
that. But it was so frustrating to me that my practice is closed at the moment, but I think I'm going into a cash only situation moving forward when I do open up the practice,
hmm
because it was just so hard to go back, and I feel badly, that their coverage wasn't there, but,
Mhm.
if someone thinks they're being covered and they book multiple appointments with you, you help them, and then all of a sudden they have this whopping multi-thousand-dollar bill.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so tough, and that is something that has kind of scared me away from private practice because I'm like, "Oh, I would love to be able to do my own thing, but there's just so much that goes into that." And
Mhm.
it's very stressful, at
It
least in my
Yes.
mind.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that getting referrals from doctors can be tricky. You don't just, like, become an RD, go into private practice, and then just, like, patients start coming to you.
Right.
And a lot of times, like, there's a hospital locally, they refer to their hospital outpatient dietitians,
Mhm.
or, a local PCP. They have dietitians that they're supposed to refer to within their
Mhm.
networks. And
Yeah.
so, being an independent rogue dietitian, you're not getting any of those referrals unless you actually know that GI doctor. Like, there's a few people that I developed relationships with that knew that I was great with. Happened to be really good with IBS and celiac and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And so he would send folks to me, but anyway, you have to be a hustler for sure,
Yeah, yeah,
which is a lot of work.
Build your
Yeah.
network, yeah.
Um, so would you do it all over again?
I would, yeah.
Okay.
I think that I would, and maybe because the goal was to be a dietitian for so long, like, I haven't even looked past that, so it's like, "Oh, if I wasn't doing this, what else would I be doing? What are my interests outside of nutrition?" kind of thing, but yeah, I would definitely do it. I would do it again, and I would advise people that want to do this, like, really think long and hard about what you want out of it. um like, for me, it was job security, and I feel like I have that, at least for now. Of course, anything could change that, but yeah, if what you want is the preventative side of nutrition, maybe don't make being a registered dietitian be your first line of
Right.
attack on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it worked for me, in that it helped me, those credentials helped me get a little bit more, credibility when I'm
Mhm.
writing or whatever. But as far as having my own private practice, it was a real grind, and um, something that I'm just taking a big break from right now because I'm doing other things. But it
Yeah.
it was definitely, but then again, going back for me, working in a hospital felt really depressing, just being in
Yeah.
that environment every day, right?
Yeah.
It felt to me, depressing, and I felt that the reimbursement was unfair.
Yeah.
So I guess it just depends on, like you said, it just depends on what people are looking to get out of it.
Mhm.
Um, but eh, but I will say I'm glad I went through it all. Like the first program I did, nutritional therapy, was helpful for the philosophy and for that one-on-one kind of, like, coaching, stuff. But that hard sciences, the exposure to working in a hospital, the exposure to
Mhm.
multiple, different types of populations, to give me a really good, um, grounding in real world instead of just the people who are out there looking to optimize.
Right.
Um, that is something that I would never have gotten if I didn't become a dietitian.
Right. Right. Yeah, with working in a hospital, I've had to do a lot of mindset shifts in my own self, cuz you're right, it is depressing. It's sad to see the conditions that people are in. And so I've really had to reassess, come up with some different goals and different thoughts around, my career and where I see it going and things like that, and kind of look outside my job for purpose
Mhm.
and fulfillment, which I think is important for everybody to
Right.
do. Um,
Mhm.
so this is kind of helping me do that. So,
Right. You just kind of like have your thing and you're making a huge difference in there. And I'm sure doctors deal with this too. I know some doctors that all they could really see themselves doing was emergency care because they
mhm.
like fix someone and then they move on and they don't have to really face those like ongoing, lifestyle choices
Right.
people are making, right?
Right.
It's more like acute, get them fixed and bandaged up and stuff.
Right.
So, um, yeah, so doctors, nurses,
I'm sure they all are
everyone in
dealing
healthcare
with
has
that.
to kind
Yeah.
of grapple with all this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm just day by day looking for those really small wins,
Yeah.
Yeah, for one guy, he was drinking Tang and putting sugar in it. So we had a discussion about maybe let's not do that. So that was my win for
Yeah.
the day. And so I just look for things like that. Like
Right.
just really small, small things. Yeah.
Wow. Anything else you wanted to chat about before we end the call?
No, I think that's it. I think that sums it up. So yeah. If anybody
Well,
has questions, I'll put my contact information in the show notes, which have very limited means of contacting me. But yeah.
yes, you're not on social media. Well, they can also
Mm-mm.
send an email
Yeah.
to info@sacredcow.info, and then Rachel will get that and forward that on to you.
Okay. Yeah, that'll work
Yeah.
too. Perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, thank you for your contributions to the greater good in the nutrition world and also to all the hard work with deleting all my ums from the podcast, to James's podcast editing and your suggestions around the podcast. You're a really valuable person to have on my team, and
Oh, thank
congratulations on becoming a
you.
dietitian.
Thank you so much. It's been fantastic working with you. I love it. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. All right. Have a
Awesome.
great
All
day.
right. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening today and for following my work. If you believe in making sure people all over the world should have access to nutritious food, please join my mission through my nonprofit, the Global Food Justice Alliance. Visit sustainabledish.com/join and become a sustaining member today. All sustaining members get early access to ad-free podcasts plus free downloads, and you'll be helping get healthy protein like meat, fish, and eggs to food insecure kids. That's sustainabledish.com/join. And thank you.